Hi, this is Carmen from AnnieDesignCrochet.com, and today I'm going to show you how to make the Tendril shawl. Tendril shawl is one of the most popular patterns on my blog, and you can go there to find the written pattern, or if you read charts you can also find the chart for the pattern on my blog. The shawl starts at one corner and increases gradually on one side while decreasing in steps every 4 rows on the other side. It's not complicated, and once you get the first repeat down, there's one repeat, second repeat, third, and so on, you will soon get the pattern memorized. But I think it might be important just to watch the first, say, 8 rows, 9 rows with this video, and that will really help you, especially for those of you who have difficulty in the very beginning of it. I hope this helps. We will first make our setup row, and for that we will make a slip knot and chain 6. We will make one treble, yarn around the hook twice, into our very first chain, right there at the beginning of our chain 6. Make one treble, and that's just our first row, which is our setup row. It makes a little V at the very bottom, and now we will make row 1. We will chain 6, and turn. We will now make one V-stitch. A V-stitch for this pattern is a double crochet, chain 2, one more double crochet, and that's row 1. So we have our chain 6, which counts as one treble, chain 2 space, and our V-stitch, which is a double crochet, chain 2, double crochet. Now for row 2 we will first chain 2. That chain 2 does not count as a stitch, either here or throughout the pattern. We will make a V-stitch into our first chain 2 space. That's double crochet, chain 2, double crochet, and when we come to our final space, which is our treble and our chain 2, into that final space we will make another V-stitch, double crochet, chain 2, one double crochet, and to finish off row 2 we will chain 2 and make one final treble stitch into that same space. And that's row 2. Chain 2, which doesn't count as a stitch, V-stitch, V-stitch, chain 2 and one treble. And for row 3 we will chain 6, turn, in our first chain 2 space, V-stitch, double crochet, chain 2, double crochet, into our next chain 2 space, which is the center of our V-stitch there, we will do another V-stitch, double crochet, chain 2, double crochet, and in our final chain 2 space, in our last V-stitch, we will do double crochet, chain 2, double crochet. And to finish off row 3 we will make a single double crochet just right in there in that space of that chain 2. This will just straighten the edge. So there's your double crochet. So that's row 3. Chain 6, V-stitch, V-stitch, V-stitch and one final double crochet right into our last space. Row 4. Row 4 is the 4th row of your 4-row repeat pattern. It's the row here, you can see it on the finished shawl, where you have this row of double crochet cluster shells that form a nice little bit of texture in the pattern. I'll show you how to do it now. So first of all, you will chain 2 and turn, and in your first V-stitch, chain 2 space there, we will make double crochet 3 together, chain 2 and another double crochet 3 together. So you yarn over your hook into the space, grab your yarn, you now have 3 loops, yarn over and bring it through 2 and stop. Yarn over into your space, pull through, yarn over and bring it through 2 loops. And the last time, yarn over into the space, yarn over and bring it through 2 loops. You will now have 4 loops on your hook. Yarn over and bring it through all 4 loops. That's your first half of your cluster shell done. Chain 2 and one more, yarn over, pull through, yarn over through 2 loops. Second time, 2 loops, yarn over, insert your hook, yarn over, pull it through 2 loops. Again, you have 4 loops on your hook. Yarn over and pull it through all 4 loops. And that's the first cluster shell made. And we will make that across the row in each V-stitch. So yarn over into your chain 2 space, yarn over, pull through, yarn over through 2 loops. And a second time, and a third time, and through all 4 loops. Chain 2, yarn over and make another double crochet 3 together cluster. One more in your next V-stitch, which is the last one on this row. Chain 2, one more cluster, you can find the written pattern for this shawl with all of the special stitches written out for you on my blog under Tendril shawl at anniedesigncrochet.com. And we will make our final cluster shell into our very last space. That's the beginning chain 6 from the previous row. That's our last cluster shell, and to finish off the row as before, we will chain 2 and make 1 treble all there in our final space. And that's row 4. Row 5, chain 6 and turn. And in our very first chain 2 space, just before our first cluster shell, we will make a V-stitch. Double crochet, chain 2, double crochet. In the next cluster shell, we will make another V-stitch in the chain 2 space. You can see what I've done there. And in our next shell, chain 2 space, we will make 1 more V-stitch. Now for this row and every row after our cluster shell rows, we will stop when we have 2 shells left. This is what will give us the nice edge on our shawl, and we will go into the space between the shell we've just been in and the next shell, right in that space, and we will do a double crochet. And that's our first decrease, and this is also the first row of our 4-row repeat pattern. So when you're working on top of a cluster shell row, you will always stop when there are 2 shells remaining, and you will do 1 final stitch between this shell and this shell, and then we will stop, and we chain 2 and we turn. And now we do a normal V-stitch row across, double crochet, chain 2, double crochet in our first V-stitch, another V-stitch in our next V-stitch, in our next V-stitch, lay it down every now and then and have a look at what you're doing if it seems confusing. And in our very final space, or chain 6 space, we will do another V-stitch, chain 2, double crochet, and then chain 2 and 1 treble to finish off this row. And that's row 6. And for row 7, again, we chain 6 and turn. In our very first chain 2 space, we will make a V-stitch, in our next V-stitch, we will make 1 more V-stitch, and make another V-stitch in our next V-stitch. We have 2 more left. And in our final V-stitch, we will make 1 more V-stitch. And as before, we will finish off by making a double crochet in there in the space before the final chain 2. And that's the 3rd row of our 4-row repeat. Row 5, 6 and 7. And now for row 8, we will make a cluster shell row as before. So chain 2 and turn. In our first V-stitch, we will make a double crochet 3 together, chain 2, and we will make shells the whole way across. Until we come to our final V-stitch. Another shell in that. And again, as before, in our final chain 6 space, we will make another shell. Chain 2 and 1 treble. And that's row 8. You can see the shape of the shawl forming there now. And when we will do our next row, which is a repeat of the last 4 rows, we will work our V-stitches, and as before we will stop when there are 2 shells left and finish there in our final shell. Row 9, chain 6 and turn, V-stitch in our first chain 2 space, and V-stitch in each chain 2 space of each shell across until 2 shells remain as before. I have 1 more to do. V-stitch in our third last shell, and we will stop here. I have 2 shells remaining, and we will do a double crochet in the space between those 2 shells, and that's row 9. Row 10, chain 2 and turn, V-stitch in your first V-stitch, and V-stitch in each chain 2 space of each V-stitch across. And in your final space, the chain 6 from the previous row, we will make 1 more V-stitch, chain 2, 1 treble, and that's row 10. And for row 11, we will chain 6 and turn. In our first chain 2 space, we will make a V-stitch, and we will make a V-stitch in each chain 2 space across. Sorry for the noise of the truck. It's normally a very, very quiet road. You just maybe hear the odd car and a few tractors. But it's a nice day and I have the windows open. V-stitch in our final V-stitch, and double crochet just before our chain 2 space, and that's row 11. You can see the lovely shape forming there of the nice rounded increase side, and on the left hand side there's the decrease row, which giving you these nice kind of steps. Our final row on this 4 row repeat is a repeat of this row here. It's a shell row, so I will just do that for you, and you should be able to continue from there. Chain 2, turn, shell in your first V-stitch, and make a shell in each V-stitch across. I'm just at the end of row 12 and I've one final space left to make my last shell in. See, I've done a shell in each V-stitch the whole way across, and in our final chain 6 space we will make our last shell. Chain 2, 1 treble. And there you can see these are our 4-row repeat rows, row 9, 10, 11 and 12, and you just keep repeating them until your shawl is the size you want, or if you're using one skein of yarn, as I showed you earlier, just one skein when your yarn is run out. And if you just go to my blog, you can find a written version of this pattern, and just remember to keep repeating rows 9, 10, 11 and 12. When you repeat your first row 9 on your way back there, remember you always stop before your last 2 shells, and that will give you that lovely decrease on one side. So it's not a difficult pattern, and I hope you enjoy it, and I'll see you soon for another video. Thank you, take care.